Not too bad, but I can feel the cold through my spine and setting all my nerves on fire.
I take it must be cold there in Laramie today.
A little bit.
We're giving everybody just a few more minutes to get signed in. So when we left off on Tuesday, Michaela, Holly, Maria, and Kristen were sharing with us some different activities just to kind of show what a student that is ELL is experiencing when they go into a new classroom or a new school. And I would like, if they were willing, to just share just one of those activities with us and have us actually go through that activity just to kind of have that experience. Would you four be okay with doing that with us this morning? Perfect. We will go ahead and start there, and then we will just move on through the list.
Maria, did you want to screen share?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Okay.
We should all probably have a minor in technology by the time all of this pandemic is done and over with, right?
All right. Oops. Okay. All right. So I'll be doing this one. So if you all just want to read this section right here. All right. So what did you guys what happened and to whom? So what did Chen do? Did you guys recognize any of the key features of each letter? Could you pronounce the sounds of the letters? Could you recognize all of the words? Could you decode the unfamiliar words? Okay. So the next slide, so this top section is kind of what it said. Okay. All right. How do I stop sharing? Sorry.
Here, Maria, I can stop share it for you.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay, I am definitely interested in if anyone could read that first slide that was shared with us.
I feel like I could identify like what the verbs were, kind of, because like some of them ended in ed, so a lot of it was past tense. But like also just the way it was written was like really hard to figure out what was going on. And plus, I didn't know sometimes like if like the things were places or people or like anything like that because it was just capitalized, which doesn't help a whole lot.
I felt like it really kind of reiterated what the video showed that you all had shared, where I'm that poor student thought that they were talking about like physical blocks, not blocks of a neighborhood. And just knowing that everybody does have a different definition attached to certain words and how we need to be careful to clarify exactly what we mean by that particular word. So I felt like that was going to make that kind of hard too, even knowing, even if you could read it, what does that actually mean for that particular student? Any other thoughts or comments, questions about the phrase that was shared with us?
One thing I thought was interesting was like in the second slide, the sentence, like the way it was ordered, made it easier to figure out exactly what was happening, which is interesting because I think like especially at the secondary level, like the texts that we read aren't always in that like really active well, I don't even know if they were in active voice, but they're not always in like the like really direct language, which can make it harder to understand like what is happening and who's doing what and what the subject is and all that.
That is a really good point. I don't know about anyone else, but I know like when I've read different things from like different time periods, the way stuff is worded can sometimes be really difficult. Like, okay, what are they trying to say here? So even when it is written in your home language and you know that language really well, if it was done in a different time period, it can be extremely difficult to understand as well. So that's even something else to think about, especially for those going into more of your secondary education. Even some of your actual English language speakers may have troubles deciphering what is being said and what's not being said. Well, thank you, ladies, for sharing that with us. I appreciate that little activity to kind of get us started. We'll just kind of keep moving on. Would Kyle, Brock, and Kyle be up for going now?
I am ready to rock and roll.
Alrighty. All right, you guys have the floor.
Real quick, Brock and Kyle, do we all do our independent share screen, or you just want me to do it real quick on my computer because I have it already ready, set, rock and roll?
You got it.
Let's see here. Quick question: how do I share a screen?
Okay, so,
There. Three
okay.
buttons.
And if you have any videos in there, you will want to share computer sound as you're sharing your screen.
Okay. Ta-da. Okay. All right. So our project was Native American schooling in the United States. And I just gotta say, we're just gonna alternate back and forth and seeing about going through slides. The history.
Starting off with history, go ahead and next slide. So this is just focusing on American, like once Americans were actually in the United States, but before Americans were actually in the U.S., I think most of the education for Native Americans was more religious than anything else. So we're just going to be focusing on sort of the United States when it comes to the education. So early in the mid 1800s, so in 1819, the United States Congress passed the Indian Civilization Act. This act gave $10,000 a year to support religious group and other people who are willing to live and teach Native Americans. This led to the funding of mission schools, which are schools that were originally run by Christian missionaries, which were used for the westernization of Native Americans. Next slide. So Charles Eastman was a Sioux native who was also known as Ohiesha. I probably pronounced that wrong, which was his Native American name. He went to these mission schools and became an author and a doctor. He was famous for writing the first book of American history from the perspective of Native Americans. So can you click on that video?
Okay, the video's not showing on our screen.
It's not? Okay.
Nope.
Let's see here.
You might have to stop share and reshare it again.
Okay. And share screen. Okay. I might have to do this for everything. Just
And that's fine.
okay. There we go. You guys hear it?
He was the first
Yes.
writer of international renown.
He presented Indians to whites to explain what it was like to be an Indian.
My family and I have spent the last 10 years searching for the story of my grandfather, Charles Eastman, and bringing it back to our Dakota homeland.
Everyone always uses the suit or the headdress to show the two sides of him.
It was a rarity for any member of the Indian community to become a writer.
I was sitting in the library at Dartmouth, and the librarian had pulled out the Charles Eastman papers to show me, and I felt his presence there. He was trying to tell me something. It was about my family all the way back to that time.
What boy would not be an Indian for a while when he thinks of the freest life in the world? This life was mine. Every day there was a real hunt. There was real game. We studied the habits of animals, just as you study your books.
So basically, our ancestors who were living here were starving then.
He was only 4 years old when the Dakota War happened, and to experience that again.
There's probably about 280 people in here, buried in there.
It must have been traumatic. It must have brought back a lot of feelings and emotions about what happened to his own community and family.
He really, to me, is a kind of towering figure of his time. In incredible circumstances of loss, is able to retrieve his dignity and keep that sense that his people come first.
Indigenous people today still live in the kind of world that Ohiesha lived in, where his population was disregarded, that we are forced to work within structures that are not our own. They were his struggle, they're still ours.
Oh, wow, look at that. I've never seen a picture of him smiling that big or that happy. That's not the person that you hear about or that gets written about. This is actually who he was.
just thought that was an interesting video. But next slide. So around 1879, the U.S. government Indian Office created day and boarding schools for Native Americans. The first boarding school was off the reservation, which was the first time this happened, and was called Carlisle Indian Industrial School. These were half-day academic and half-day vocational programs. Next slide. So in 1886, a school called, which was this school, set out to get rid of the Native American culture from the Native Americans who went to that school. And pictured below is the transition of a group of Native American students from their native clothing to, wearing uniforms. And I mean, I was a little bit disturbed by this picture, by these images, because I mean, it's like they are, being forced to be sucked out of their own culture. I mean, their hair is all, white, American, modern, and in the picture on the right and on the left, they're dressed how they lived. And I just, taking the culture away from people is definitely bothersome to me, but it's kind of a wild transition from those two pictures alone. So next slide.
All right. We'll talk about simulation of through the 1870 through 1930s. As you could tell, these two pictures here show what that meant by doing. On the left of these pictures, you see how Native Americans did dress before around this time frame. White Americans trying to assimilate them into their own culture. It was a tactic in order to have them be part of their society by getting rid of their own. The impact of the 1870s to the 1930s is in the 1980s. Like one of them was in 1891, the United States government issued the compulsory attendance law. And what this law enabled federal officers to forcibly take Native American children from the home and the reservation and place these children into boarding schools where they learned how to become proper citizens. While at the same schools, these Native Americans taught these Native American children English and modern education. These schools also forced Native American children to suppress their own heritage and culture. What that meant by that was that they told them how to be, at that time frame, what they considered proper, and it meant that the Native American children couldn't practice their own heritage, their own culture, their own language. They were told to suppress that, and if they did go into their Native American roots, they would be punished for it. One of them, as we already mentioned before, was the Carlisle Indian School, was best known for this. And the motto, which I find very interesting for this school, was to kill the Indian and save the man. This school was founded by Officer Richard H. Pratt. He served in the Army at that time frame, and he believed that this was the best way in order to, at this time frame, they didn't consider Indians proper humans. They considered them to be somewhat savage, and they need to step in and teach them the proper ways to become a proper citizen. So life in the boarding school, what it was like for the Native American children in these schools, was that these schools, the students were not allowed to use their given names by their parents, and instead were given European names. Due to this, children lost their own names. So what happened was, say for example, my name was, right, we're using my name, for example, my name's Kyle, and I was forced to go in this school, and it wasn't appropriate. So they'll give me a different name like Bob, and they would only call me by Bob, not by my original name. And over time, some students forgot their true names, and that's the reason why people lost their children, lost heritage, they lost their roots because of this. So when students were only able to speak English and were forced to speak, and they were forbidden to use their own language, and they weren't able to partake in their traditions, their heritage. So they weren't allowed to do any celebrations, practice any of their religion. But over time, and during some of this time as well, students would disobey these rules and practice their heritage in secret. If they were caught doing this in secret, the punishment was extremely severe. And I don't believe any of the children were necessarily killed. However, these schools were kind of a breeding ground for disease in a matter of sense. And a lot of children did die due to the disease because of these schools, because these children did not have the immunities as the Americans at the time did as well. In the 1900s, the Native American education system. Wait, who's?
Yeah, this is mine.
Yep. Go ahead. You go ahead.
So in the 1900s, we had the Progressive Education of 1928. It was a large program, but how it had to do with Native Americans was the portion called the Merriam Report. This report brought to light the very poor Native American education system on the reservation, and this led to, in 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act, which granted certain rights to Native Americans, one of which is a better education.
All right. So this was kind of a little fun fact I kind of found out, but I've known about this for a long time. It's like during World War II and also during World War I, Native Americans were recruited to do due to their ability to speak English in their tribal language. It was most notably implemented in World War II. These men were known as code talkers. And the Axis powers, such as Germany, Italy, and Japan at the time, were never able to decipher the codes which the code talkers used. This reason why is due to the code talkers wasn't a code, actually, it was the language of the code talkers. So it was usually a Navajo tribe member that did this. And I just found that very interesting, is that over time, in the very beginning, people tried to suppress their heritage, their language, and at the same time, now it's kind of being hypocrisy that during a time of war, they would use their heritage in order to win a war by delivering messages to Allied forces. So I just found that very kind of hypocrisy and very interesting.
All right, so continuing on again with history. So now in 1968, the very first Native American college was established called the Navajo Community College. And now there are many of them, over 30. And you can go ahead and click on the video.
Okay. I have to do the.
Yeah, it looks like it.
As one of the first master's degree students in environmental science at Sitting Bull College, Lewis Walking Elk eventually wants to use his degree to help those on the reservation. He's one of the first in his family to go to college.
My dad and mom both encouraged me all throughout their lives, throughout my life. You know, my dad especially, he didn't finish high school, and he always was like, "Hey, you gotta do something."
Situated in the remote hills of North Dakota on Standing Rock Indian Reservation, Sitting Bull College is one of more than 30 tribal colleges in the United States. Some 300 students, including student body president Dakota Kidder, are completing their higher education at this federally funded school in hopes of defying statistics that show only about 10% of Native Americans have a college degree, roughly half the national average.
We do have a lot of problems on the reservation, and Sitting Bull College does all that it can to make sure that students are getting to class, whether it be transportation, childcare.
The U.S. Marshals come to the site facility to investigate it.
The mission of getting more Native Americans to college and making sure they leave with a degree is crucial to the school's president, Laurel Vermillion.
A huge majority are first-generation students, college students who don't have a lot of experience. They don't have parents who can tell them or talk about, college. And so when they leave the reservation and go onto these big mainstream campuses, they're lost.
Vermillion says many young Native Americans, particularly men, are looking for direction and a sense of purpose.
So it's very useful. So let's in parts of its technical program, which offers classes in everything from welding to oil drilling, the college wants to really attract more young men to campus. Currently, the male to female ratio here at Sitting Bull College is 30 to 70.
Scott Davis, the executive director of the North Dakota Indian Affairs Commission, is also working to close the gap, helping tribal colleges get millions of dollars to start workforce development programs.
There are plenty of jobs. We're talking right now in North Dakota, anywhere from 22,000 to 25,000 jobs right now. And there's just not a lot of people to fill them in small rural North Dakota. But on the flip side of that coin, we got still some of our tribes really struggling with the unemployment rate.
Davis calls tribal colleges a shining beacon on reservations, giving hope to young Native Americans of a life of possibility and not poverty. Arup Pandey, VOA News, Fort Yates, North Dakota.
All right. Brings us to culture part.
Yeah. So this was my section. As you can see, we have like a really rich history and a really long history, which is also kind of seen in like the culture of Native American individuals. There's so many tribes, which all have really unique cultures. So it was kind of difficult to collect like information that is representative all the way through. So I tried to narrow it down to like norms and values that are seen generally, but none of these are to say like that this is like for every Native American. Because like I said, there are so many tribes and each tribe is really unique in its own way. And they view things differently in some aspects. But a common thing that is seen across classrooms that have Native American students are differences in like differences between typical or I don't know, your typical like Anglo-European American and Native American students. So one of the biggest like values that is seen across a lot of Native American tribes is humility and harmony. A lot of Native Americans like humility and harmony are values within their culture, within their communities. And how this is expressed in classrooms is the idea that like a lot of times Native American students may not feel comfortable demonstrating their like proficiency in something, which tends to them seeming a lot more reserved. In Native American cultures, it's common to not try and be like superior than others. You all, I mean, in a Native American community, people typically work together and pool resources and try to achieve a goal. It's not really about being better than somebody else, which is sort of counter to what a lot of America is. Other differences we see are the ideas of possession, which in Native American communities, possession shows like possessing something, having material possession is something to be shared. Whereas in a lot of like I guess like normal American culture, possession is like a symbol of status. So the more you have, the better, because, you know, it puts you at a higher socioeconomic status or social status or whatever. But in Native American communities, possessions are meant to be shared. Yeah. Another difference that we see is practice versus performance. A lot of Native American students in their culture, things are done through practice, and they're done just to be able to say that they can do it, and so they can help. That's pretty much it. It's like, can you do this task? Good, come and do it and help out your community. Whereas in schooling, a lot of the times it's like, not just can you do this task, but like, can you do it better than other people, more proficiently, you know? Just, I mean, that's pretty much like seen in our grading system, really. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about was observation and demonstration. These are things that are typical in Native American communities when it comes to learning. A lot of children in Native American communities learn through observation first and like watching something being demonstrated to them. So they'll observe it, they'll have it demonstrated to them, but there's not a lot of like language or instruction that's used in teaching. If it is, it's pretty minimal, or it can be minimal, which is sometimes really different from typical like instruction. I think we tend to use a lot of language and a lot of direct, like do this, do this, do this, do this, next do this. And you have like all these restraints in a classroom, but in like a Native American community, it might just be like, just watch me do this and then you're gonna do it. And there's not gonna be much instruction in that way. So those are some differences in like the norms and values between Native American communities and traditional, or sorry, not traditional, like Anglo-European communities. Next slide. Cool. So the other part, another thing that I wanted to bring up was language, because I think that's really, really important to pretty much any culture, but it's definitely especially important for Native Americans. A lot of language expresses who they are, but it's important to remember pretty much like for a long time, America was like eradicated. A lot of Native American languages kind of goes back to that idea of kill the Indian, save the man. Part of destroying someone's culture would include destroying their language. So throughout that, we see a lot of English only ideologies behind education and behind the culture that we're trying to assimilate Native Americans to. So yeah, I think I just wanted to bring up that language is really important to their culture, and that typically, historically, America has not been very kind to that. And we see it in ideas such as participant structures. There's this scholarly article I read for another class, my sociolinguistic literacies class, and it talks about how language influences the structures in which students may feel comfortable participating. And in a lot of ways, Native American students may not feel comfortable or capable in their use of a language such as English. It's just very different. They're in kind of a new culture, and that influences the way that they participate in classrooms and in learning, because a lot of the times they just won't participate, or if they do, it's in very frowned upon manners. Usually it's like between peers. So that means that there's a lot of like talking out of turn and talking when the teacher's talking. And, but that's typical of like what their language, how their language functions. And it's not so typical in how English language functions. And then I just wanted to put some pictures of certain Native American languages. There's a ton of Native American languages, even though historically America tried really hard to get rid of a lot of these languages. There's still a ton that are around. One of like the most interesting ones, I think, so the bottom right, that's Tlingit, which is Alaskan and like Northwestern American, or sorry, Northwestern America. I think that's the region. It's mostly in like Washington. Oh, what's that city? Sorry, I just blanked on the city. Anyways, Tlingit is one of their languages. It's a pretty prevalent one in that area. And it's really cool to see because a lot of elders will pass that language down to their children and their children's children. And it's actually a pretty common language in that area. And then I have some other languages. The bottom left, I don't know, I should have labeled it. I believe that one is Arapaho, and the top right is Crow. So I just wanted to demonstrate that they're still like these languages are still around. People still speak these languages. They're not dead languages. They're not like Latin. And they're important to people's culture. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind in your own classrooms, I think. Next slide. So then I also wanted to talk a little bit about Native American culture in WYO because we have a pretty rich Native American history and culture within Wyoming. Historically, Wyoming was a place for the Plains Indians, which were nomadic tribes. Some of these tribes include the Arapaho, Cheyenne, the Crow, the Sioux, Shoshone. There's a tribe called the Sheep Eater, which I thought was pretty cool, kind of terrifying, but pretty cool. Yeah, and then obviously we have the Wind River Reservation, which has a lot of culture to it as well. It's home to the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho tribes. So I think it's cool that we have this type of like culture in Wyoming. Because I think like, I don't know, growing up in Cheyenne, like we didn't really have Native American students in our school, I don't think. I can't think of one, at least in my high school or junior high. But there's like, these students are in our country and like, I think it's important to include them and know about them and, you know, so I just wanted to include a section that talked about Native American culture in Wyoming. Next slide.
1 sec. For those who don't know, I'm from Riverton. I finished high school up there. So the Wind River Reservation was literally outside my back porch. It's very different being around that because believe it or not, there is some friction between the cultures out there. And it's not the entire, like 99% of them. It is just like a small percentage of people on both sides that have issues. So you gotta be very careful, especially when you're addressing certain issues, because some people do not have patience or the tolerance for other people to tell them what's going on. Just, you know, no JBS info. Society.
So we have two videos. They're both about like 5 minutes long. Do you think we have time to watch those?
If you feel that they are pertinent to what you are discussing, please feel free. We'll take as much time as we need to get these completed. I'm not too worried.
Okay, cool. I wanted to include these two videos because I think that they can speak more on the behalf of Native Americans than I ever will be able to. So.
We'll talk about the new Volvo, how it's electrical, and we have to go with that ad. There we go.
I'm Apache, but really that's the government's name because they can't say Zefrikai in there.
They will tell me how awesome they think it is that I've decided to be a part of my culture. And it's funny to me, I like hits me really weird and I don't like it. And I didn't know why at first, but it's because I haven't decided to be a part of my culture. I live it every day.
I'm more comfortable with the term Native, divorced from Native American. I know there are people who use Indigenous. There is one term I do not like to be called is American Indian.
And for me, to be Indigenous is to have an intimate and interconnected relationship to a whole land. And so that's really important because land is, you know, tied to every aspect of who we are.
Being Native in a city is almost a daily reminder of your people's erasure, of the fact that people don't even remember that you're here and that you exist.
But what I did encounter was just this preconceived notion that all Native Americans are dead.
I've had older white men come up to me and say, oh man, if this was 40 years ago, I can just do whatever I wanted to.
You know, the cattle outside doing the work and the dog inside the house, those are property. Those are the Black folks in America. They're our property to white men. Then the exotic antelope on the wall, or the exotic, you know, that's the native, that's how natives are perceived in America.
We're treated like animals. They monitor our blood quantum. We're the only, I mean, besides dogs and horses, I don't know of any other animal that they monitor the blood quantum.
The way I explain it to people is like, imagine a pizza with different slices and let's say 32 slices. Of the 32 slices, I'm 28 Apache. That's my particular blood quantum. And Native Americans in the US are the only minority group who have to prove their nativeness on an Indian card.
It's used to divide Native people against each other, because it can be used as a way to say, I am more Native than you. And I was a part of that too. I used my 4/4 to kind of make myself feel better against other people.
The one drop rule, meaning that, you know, 1 drop of black blood makes you black. You know, that was to keep as many people oppressed or, you know, legitimize their oppression as possible. But on the other side, 1 drop of anything else completely dilutes you as a Native person. So if you're a Native person, you have a 1 drop of something else, and suddenly you're less Native. So it's the opposite.
Traditionally, within the Apache society, you go by the mother. And if the mother's recognized as Apache, she has her clan, the children are unquestionably Apache. Not in the American context, not when patriarchy trumps matriarchy. So what does that mean? My sisters are short 1/16 of a degree. What does that mean? Does it mean their pinkies aren't Apache? What does that mean?
You know, being a mixed race person is a whole another side of it, but that's a very common experience in our tribe. So it's not as if we're unusual in that way. What is unusual is the admixture of Black. My grandfather actually doesn't want people, if he hears that somebody from the tribe is coming over, he won't come out of his room because he doesn't want them to know that he's that complexion. He doesn't, I guess he doesn't want me to be affiliated with having African American blood, but I mean, I say it. It's not going to change anything.
If it were up to the American government, Natives wouldn't be around because after a certain time, that blood will dilute. It will go out. And so if there's no Native peoples to provide benefits, then we're not obligated to meet these treaty rights. And if we're not obligated to meet these treaty contracts, then the land is available. The resources are available.
And I think that essential point about our claim to sovereignty, our claim to land, our claim to a culture, our claim to resources is one that gets lost if we don't insist upon the fact that we are nations.
And we have taken huge steps to decolonizing, and that proof comes from people being able to have the opportunities to speak their language, to be on their ancestral land.
The thing with decolonization is that it's an ongoing process, just like grieving, just like any loss.
As much as possible now, I try to tell people that I have a Native American name, and maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me. My name maybe doesn't have a romanticized Hollywood Indian name, but my name has more meaning than that. My name means that my family survived. My family survived disease. My family survived Catholicism. My family survived settler colonialism, and my family, they survived. I survived. My existence is resistance. Me saying my name is Skiam Polks, that is resistance in and of itself.
This next video is a video that talks about like what it means to be Native American in schools. So it's similar to that last one, but it is students, children. So yeah.
It kind of sucks. It's kind of like playing dodgeball, but getting hit every single time. All just in school basically is who they were, where they lived, how they were killed, and how we stole in from the like white people basically.
administration is definitely a bit harsher on certain races. Teachers assume a lot about us, and they assume that we're like junkies or alcoholics, that I'm like a thug or something, and I'm not.
When I do say I'm Native American, the substitute teachers, they always ask about per capita checks. You shouldn't be here, go back to your land, go back home. It's kind of stupid because this is our land.
But it's just the people that make you suffer to go into school. Our teachers, they don't really help us like with bullying.
It makes your self-esteem so low to where you feel like you don't even want to get up and go to school. I think representation is very important, and seeing people who look like us in positions that matter.
The school system should advocate more, just say, hey, Native Americans are still alive. Don't be mean to them, and here's a few facts about them.
We're just more than natives. We're more than that. We're people. We have the same emotions. We have the same fights and stuff that you're probably going through. And we have to go through the same thing.
If we really are able to understand that we are Native people and we are all one, and we have to lift each other up. Music.
I want to be a cosmetologist.
I want to become an actress, but I don't see a lot of Native American actresses.
Want to help out with my family when I get older.
I want to become the first Native American male model to be known.
I just want to see more.
Basketball every day would be my dream to have a full scholarship.
But I really just want to learn. I want to see where it takes me. I want to be able to help other people. And of course, I always want to be able to come back to my where I came from and celebrate and honor that with other people. So yeah, there's the reason I showed you guys that video is because there's a lot of honestly, there's a lot of racism towards Native American individuals in our country. A lot of that is due to the history of our country, and it's something that a lot of Native American people face in today's society, whether it's education or jobs or really a lot of aspects of society. So yeah, I wanted to bring this act up because I think it shows a lot of what makes it difficult for Native American individuals in our society. So the Indian Relocation Act of 1956, it dissolved federal recognition of a lot of tribes, which meant that it ended a lot of funding for reservations across the nation in terms of their schools and their hospitals and other basic needs. And this also led to the movement of a lot of Native Americans from reservations to urban areas. Minneapolis is actually a pretty big one, where there's a lot of Native American individuals. When this act occurred and people started flooding, or Native Americans started flooding cities, they faced high rates of job discrimination and few opportunities to advance in their jobs if they landed one. So in a lot of ways, we see high rates of poverty. And yeah, do you want to go to the next slide? So yeah, like I said earlier, we see a lot of high rates of poverty within the Native American community. It also is really difficult for Native Americans to own land, obtain land and own it. A lot of the land that is dedicated to Native Americans or part of what they own is still connected to like the United States government. The Bureau of Indian Affairs remains like a legal steward for most tribal land. So yeah, because it's difficult to own land, it's difficult to land jobs, difficult to advance in those jobs. We see really high rates of poverty, really hard times building wealth. And that's all kind of part of their lives in American society. Yeah. Next slide. Again, and we see this in a lot of other ways too. It's not just like these like physical, tangible things. It's even like embedded in a lot of our culture. There's a ton of stereotypes and generalizations towards Native American individuals. The two movies I have here, The Silent Enemy and Little Big Man, are movies that were made. Little Big Man was made in like the 70s, I think, early 70s, maybe a little later. I can't remember. It's somewhere. It's pretty old. And The Silent Enemy was made a way long time ago. I think it's a black and white film. It's a silent film too, I think. I watched it over the summer. I can't remember. But there are a lot of stereotypes that are presented in film and in books towards Native Americans and in television that like portray this traditional Indian, which is usually like this generalization that A, all Native Americans are the same, B, they're like savages, or they're like these wise men that always help the white guy. And that's really simply not true. There's a lot of variation between tribes and within tribes. And it's something that I think we need to do better of recognizing that there's like, even the term Native American kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I feel like I'm grouping all of these individuals into one lump sum thing, which is not very accurate. But it's something that's pretty deep rooted in our society. So yeah. Do you want to go to the next slide?
All right. So we're gonna do a little thing here about offensive names. It's due to the increase of popularity of sports, rather it be high school, college, or a professional level. People have used mascots in some way that some will be stereotypical and or offensive. An example of this would be the Washington Redskins, now known as the Washington football team. The name Redskin is considered a racial slur within the Native American culture. The Washington Redskins have had, oh crap, go back there. Have had that name for 87 years. And there's other teams out there that a lot of people consider offensive, like the Atlanta Braves, the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's just a lot of stereotypes and offensive names. So I kind of know a little bit about, from my own family history, about Redskins. My grandma taught me, because I don't have any Native American blood in me, but my grandma does, because she was like 1/16 Cheyenne or Shoshone. But the thing was that like she told me what it was, and it's kind of a racial slur, but at the same time she told me it never got to her too, because she didn't let certain words dictate, or people say, hey, look, this is offensive, I want you to be hurt by these words, and she never let that happen to her. So it also depends on like where you're looking at some things. I believe that like something like that, like a racial slur, shouldn't be used as a mascot. It's kind of, it's really messed up. There's other names out there which can be, I'm like, hey, the Atlanta Braves, or was that one? How's that offensive? It actually refers to the Native Americans within Georgia around that time frame. And there's a couple of things in history when people look at go into it, you get to see that like, hey, white people, we didn't like Americans at the time didn't treat Native Americans right at that time. And I've noticed some big differences, especially being from Riverton, about how biased some people can be. And I've been to the Wind River Reservation multiple times, going over there to visit my friends. And a couple of times my friends told me, hey, you need to hide.
because I'm white, I'm not allowed to theoretically be there. And that kind of showed me that it's on both sides where people are just angry. Well, next slide. In today's schools promote classes in various languages and cultures. This is also to include Native American history. While some states do not offer Native American history within their curriculum, other states do. Wyoming does offer that. What I also found out was really interesting is that a second language is a language not considered to be either English or the country's origin as national speak. So if I was to go over to the Germany, it's going to be German is primary language, and then English is a secondary language. If I go over to Qatar, the primary language over there is Arabic, and English may be considered a second. I just kind of find it really interesting that they're like how Brock said that there's different languages out there, that these languages are not dead like Latin. They're still there, but they're not offered to be taught. I just wish that maybe that, hey, someone would be willing to teach that to someone else. That way, maybe people can understand a little better about certain cultures, because the best way, in my opinion, to learn about a culture is to live in that culture, to go over there, be part of it. Like in Korea, I learned a lot about Korea. Everyone's like, well, what do they speak down there? Is it Korean speak? I'm like, no, it's called Hangul. And I learned a lot about their culture. They have mandatory service for all men for at least 2 years in the armed services. In Qatar, they have the same thing. However, in Qatar, they are able to have people take their slots for them. It's usually other country nationals, which was changed from third country nationals. So some people from India would be paid to take someone's spot in the military. So I just kind of find that very interesting. Applications to teaching.
So yeah, there's a lot we can do, I think, as educators. I think personally, from everything that I read, one of the most useful things we can do is have or utilize culturally relevant pedagogy. I know we talked about this or that in this class, and we talked about it pretty much the whole semester, but it really is a really, really solid way of helping Native American students in your own classrooms. So that's something you can do at the education or at the teacher classroom level. This form of instruction, it just helps validate the backgrounds of the students, considers who they are and what they value as strengths, and it reflects that in the way that you teach them. By understanding their culture, you can really learn a lot about how what methods you may utilize to teach. Specifically for Native American students, I think teaching through observation and demonstration and establishing a grading system that doesn't necessarily base everyone's value on performance, rather on like their ability. I think that is a good way to make changes at the teacher student classroom level. I think another important thing is this idea of self-determination. It was something that was brought up like back in the 60s, but it is this idea that allows the colonized people of the world to chart their own destinies. And I think that that's important in education, especially because that's kind of the whole point of education is you learn, and you can make take your own path, make yourself something. But we need to create systems that actually allow individuals to do that. And right now we don't exactly have a way that does always allow any Native American student to chart their own destinies. In a lot of ways it's controlled or regulated. So with that, I think the last kind of bigger scale thing we can do to help out this group of people and this group of students in education is to be more politically aware and active. There are a lot of things that Native Americans rely on the government for, which is like, it's problematic, but it's also a little bit like of the reality. So I think it's important to be politically aware and active as educators. For example, some things that came out of political choices that have opened up doorways for Native American students are like BIE schools, which is Bureau of Indian Education Schools. In these schools, sometimes content is taught in Native American languages, and it's for and built around Native American students, which is before this not really seen. There's also tribal colleges, which are funded by the government and are usually on reservations or sometimes off of reservations too. There's like 35, I think, throughout the nation. But again, this is just another opportunity for Native Americans to be able to obtain an education and like not get rid of their entire culture. Also, I wanted to include there was an act. Sorry, let me pull it up real quick. In 2018, Governor Matt Mead, he approved of additions to the Wyoming Social Studies Content and Performance Standards, which resulted in like history, traditional culture, and contemporary contributions of Native American tribes to be included in those standards. So we're actually changing what we teach non-Native students as well, which I think is really important. But it's something that, came out of being politically aware and active and conscientious yeah.
And our famous citation slide, we decided to put it all in one. But just a side note and personal note on some things. As being a teacher, you have to remember that people have pride. And I'm a very proudful person of who I am. And I also know that not everyone is the same. Not everyone wants to be treated the same. It's important to understand as a teacher that we treat our students as appropriate age level. Like, I'm not going to treat an elementary school kid the same as I would a high schooler. For when it comes to high schoolers, when that is the secondary education, that's the one career field I want to go into as teaching high schoolers, is that people have pride. And in high school, you'll kind of find out that is where we're most sensitive to our own pride. So it's important when I'm saying this is that do not treat someone else that they are inferior or that they need a handout because that you feel obligated to. You are a teacher, you're a mentor. If you can see that they're struggling, go ask them, hey, I can notice that you're struggling. Do you need help? I can help you if you choose to. It's one of those sayings, you can only bring a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. You have to be willing to sometimes put things on hold, but be willing to help them out. And this goes for any student. It doesn't matter if they're American, Native American, from a different country, they're still a student. So sometimes they're going to need help. They're going to need someone to guide them. And sometimes you're going to have to remember that you're not their parent, but you are their teacher. So you have to make that step, that differential, and that's hard for anyone to do that. For me, it's hard to always be able to, hey, I got to put the brakes on things because I know that people I work with or sometimes my friends, they do need help and they know I'm willing to help them out, but they are going to have to be the ones in order to be willing to accept my help. So just so y'all know, people do have pride and be very wary about that because sometimes, just like pride and an ego, it can be easily hurt. So.
Thank you guys for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments for them? I know one of the things, I guess I just kind of want to make sure I heard this correctly because it kind of surprised me. Where they said, is it that Native women outnumber Native men for every, like more or less like 3 to 7 or 7 to 3, however you want to put your ratio? Did I hear that correctly, that the women in the college are outnumbering the men?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. And that is by quite a bit. And you kind of noticed it in that video, as well as you saw very few men in the video, mostly women. But yeah, having only 30 men to every 70 women, that's quite a bit.
The gender differences between, those differences in Native American communities are really, really interesting. I think part of that speaks to culture, but also a little bit to society and stereotypes and whatnot. It kind of all works together, but if you look at like a lot of older, well, not even older, but like films and TV shows depicting Native Americans, it's like every single time a Native American, usually it's men on screen, and usually they're like portrayed as like I said, either savages or like drunks or like wise but like old and decrepit like individuals. I think it's interesting, like people maybe have like more harsh stereotypes and prejudices against men in terms of like Native American communities than they do women, and maybe that's why we see part of those differences. It's really interesting though.
All right, well, I definitely want to thank you guys for that. For the sake of time, we will kind of keep moving on. The next group I have on is Maddie, Reese, and Kennedy. Are you all ready to do your presentation?
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Okay, go right ahead and get started.
Okay, I'll kind of start this off. So we decided to do our presentation on dyslexia. And then you can move on. So what is dyslexia? So kind of a quick definition is dyslexia is a language-based learning disability, and it refers to a cluster of symptoms based on language skills, particularly reading. So someone with dyslexia will normally struggle with manipulating words, and they'll struggle reading words without breaking them up into pieces. And kind of a quick little stat is dyslexia normally affects 1 in 5 people, which kind of occurs to about 20% of our population. So here's kind of a quick video to start it, to kind of describe exactly what dyslexia is. So.
Take a moment to read the following. How was that? Frustrating? Slow? What were those sentences about? They're actually a simulation of the experience of dyslexia, designed to make you decode each word. Those with dyslexia experience that laborious pace every time they read. When most people think of dyslexia, they think of seeing letters and words backwards, like seeing B as D and vice versa. Or they might think people with dyslexia see saw as was. The truth is, People with dyslexia see things the same way as everyone else. Dyslexia is caused by a phonological processing problem, meaning people affected by it have trouble not with seeing language, but with manipulating it. For example, if you heard the word cat and then someone asked you, remove the C, what word would you have left? At. This can be difficult for those with dyslexia. Given a word in isolation like fantastic, students with dyslexia need to break the word into parts to read it. Fan, tas, tick. Time spent decoding makes it hard to keep up with peers and gain sufficient comprehension. Spelling words phonetically like S-T-I-K for stick and F-R-E-N-S for friends is also common. These difficulties are more widespread and varied than commonly imagined. Dyslexia affects up to 1 in 5 people. It occurs on a continuum. One person might have mild dyslexia, while the next person has a profound case of it. Dyslexia also runs in families. It's common to see one family member who has trouble spelling, while another family member has severe difficulty decoding even one-syllable words like catch. The continuum and distribution of dyslexia suggest a broader principle to bear in mind as we look at how the brains of those with dyslexia process language. Neurodiversity is the idea that because all our brains show differences in structure and function, we shouldn't be so quick to label every deviation from the norm as a pathological disorder, or dismiss people living with these variations as defective. People with neurobiological variations like dyslexia, including such creative and inventive individuals as Picasso, Muhammad Ali, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, and Cher, clearly have every capacity to be brilliant and successful in life. So here's the special way the brains of those with dyslexia work. The brain is divided into 2 hemispheres. The left hemisphere is generally in charge of language and ultimately reading, while the right typically handles spatial activities. fMRI studies have found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than the brains of those without it. This means when they read a word, it takes a longer trip through their brain and can get delayed in the frontal lobe. Because of this neurobiological glitch, they read with more difficulty. But those with dyslexia can physically change their brain and improve their reading. With an intensive multisensory intervention that breaks the language down and teaches the reader to decode based on syllable types and spelling rules, the brains of those with dyslexia begin using the left hemisphere more efficiently while reading, and their reading improves. The intervention works because it locates dyslexia appropriately, as a functional variation in the brain, which naturally shows all sorts of variations from one person to another. Neurodiversity emphasizes this spectrum of brain function in all humans and suggests that to better understand the perspectives of those around us, we should try to not only see the world through their eyes, but understand it through their brains.
So some common characteristics of someone with dyslexia is they'll have difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition. They can have poor spelling and decoding abilities. And as a result of that, they can have problems with reading comprehension and have limited reading experience, which can also lead to a lack of growth in their vocabulary or background knowledge. Some common misconceptions and myths. Dyslexia is not at seeing words backwards or reversing letters or words. As the video kind of described, it's a bit more complex than that. Also, dyslexia can't be outgrown, and it is not a result of laziness or lack of motivation. Also, it isn't a visual issue, as many kind of think that it is, and it isn't a lack of intelligence or an incapability of reading or writing. So some personal narratives from some kids in schools that have dyslexia.
Dyslexia is a learning disability type thing, and it affects me in reading, but I also have dysgraphia, which affects me in spelling and writing. One thing that I have trouble with is I can't read my writing. So when my teacher asked me to read out loud my writing, I can't because I can't read my writing.
It's not a huge difference. I'd say definitely don't let it get in your way and think that it's a downside or a negative. It's just a different way of learning, and you might just need to do some different stuff or whatever works for you.
Dyslexia doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're really smart and different than other people.
So that you're not average. That could mean many things. It's like you might be worse in some areas, like I was worse in reading and writing, but you might excel in other things like math for me, science. I enjoy those greatly.
I'll just pretend I'm sick, I can't go to school because I'll be so far behind on work, so I won't understand even what unit we're on anymore. I stopped doing homework. I dropped my grades so low. I nearly didn't even pass the grade.
When I was younger, I was reading way below grade level, and it was really hard. I'm really good at comprehending what the story is trying to say, but actually reading through all of the words was really hard. So I got over that, and now I'm reading above grade level, but still. When somebody makes fun of me, I tell them I just have a different way of thinking, a different way of doing stuff.
The lowest moment I ever had in school was probably in second grade, and none of my papers were hung up in the hallway, and on Fridays we would always get an extra recess, and I never got to go out for that. I always had to sit on the wall and do my homework because I needed extra help and I didn't get it, and I just couldn't get it. I tried very hard, but I couldn't get it. I didn't get the same possibilities that everybody else did. They never saw what I wrote, they never understood it, so it didn't really mean anything.
Homework is an experience. It usually takes me 5 or 6 hours to do not all of my homework. I can get 3 assignments done maybe, and it hurts my mind, and sometimes if I have lots to do, I even wake up early and do more homework.
We would have these coded books on which color you were, and of course, me being a dyslexic, I was in the lowest color. You kind of feel alone at the very beginning.
So dyslexia is a very common disability that a lot of people have, and it can kind of get overlooked sometimes, I feel. Personally, it does run in my family. My mom struggled a lot in school, and she had special accommodations and had to take extra classes trying to compensate for her struggles with reading and writing. Also, my sister has had a battle with dyslexia all through school, with teachers not really being understanding or supportive, or not even believing her, saying that she was faking or just being lazy about her work. And I feel like it's not everywhere, but it is pretty common that sometimes teachers will overlook it or not believe kids that they're having these issues. Also, my younger brother has dysgraphia, which is different, but it's a similar kind of a disability, mostly affecting his writing abilities. And he does have his IUP, but he doesn't like it. He feels singled out and embarrassed about it. And I think it needs to become more acknowledged, and the school needs to become more supportive of people with disabilities. I do have a mild case of dyslexic tendencies. It's a lot lesser scale than it is the rest of my family. It only really affects me when I'm very stressed or under pressure. But I have had teachers still call me out on it or be critical about being unable to read as well or write as well as my peers.
Okay, so a little historical context. So when I kind of researched the history of dyslexia, I found that a guy by the name of Rudolf Berlin, who was a professor, he was the first person to really like get dyslexia, I guess, or understand that he has something wrong. And this is because he found that he had a difficulty in reading print. And so basically, kind of like during this, they named dyslexia the term Berlin, but he didn't like that because he didn't want that term to be more famous than he was. And so the second guy that kind of dove into it his name was Adolf Kussmaul. And so he was basically the first one who identified the difficulties that Berlin described. And this was because Berlin wrote a paper about what was going on in his difficulties with reading. And Kussmaul was the one who then wrote another paper about Berlin, where he claimed that dyslexia came from someone's angular gyrus in their brain. So after Kussmaul wrote his paper about dyslexia due to Berlin, the next guy that kind of came into action, his name was Samuel Orton. And Samuel Orton is kind of historically known as the person who founded dyslexia. And that's because he kind of dove into Kussmaul's writing, and he was the first person to actually present a formal paper about dyslexia and how the world was blind to it because it does affect everyone in different ways. And so he referred to Kussmaul's work, but then ended up drawing a different conclusion. And his conclusion was where dyslexia actually came from the lack of your cerebral dominance instead of your angular gyrus. And that made Orton pretty famous, even though he was proven incorrect. And the reason for this was because he was kind of the first person to shift the discussion of dyslexia towards a theory of cognitive development instead. And so Orton was the one who kind of put what we call now development dyslexia on the map. And he also was the first person to advocate special instruction for ones with dyslexia. So through time and more attention to dyslexia, several organizations who were dedicated to it, they were founded to provide different sources to support children with dyslexia and parents and adults. And kind of right here is a list of kind of more of a timeline of different organizations who kind of chimed in to help students and all these people with dyslexia. So although that kind of describes the history of it, there still is and there was a struggle for recognition. And as we saw in the video, it's everyone handles dyslexia differently. And kind of there's a struggle in recognition because dyslexia was used a lot by parents to explain their children's poor reading performance, called the middle class myth. And this was kind of earlier when parents decided that if their students were struggling with reading, they would kind of blame dyslexia. And a lot of people who actually were dyslexic didn't like this. And so that's why they called it the middle class myth. And the reason this is pretty important is because it actually, through this myth, it came up with a discrepancy diagnostic model. And so this model basically is what they use now, and where they kind of test someone's IQ, and it tests their reading versus like their reading age and how other students are doing. And I think that's pretty important because then it's a lot of kind of eliminating the whole factors of faking dyslexia or using it as something that it shouldn't be. So normally this kind of came with parents with higher education levels who are more likely to be aware of dyslexia. And a lot of this kind of came with the ability to obtain test results and be able to figure out how their students are doing in class. And dyslexia was being kind of more of a diagnosed in higher proportions in children from wealthier socioeconomic groups. So while reading this book called Dyslexia Debate, it basically kind of stated that there are very significant differences in ways that we label dyslexia. It claims that the writers of dyslexia have loosely used different meanings attached to it. Therefore, it's kind of hard to trust many of the earlier writings about dyslexia because they're all so different. The term dyslexia has kind of been used differently through readings that contradicts what Kusimov first said, which I think is kind of important to kind of look at dyslexia in different ways and how it affects people differently. And so I kind of leave an open question to you guys of what do we know about dyslexia? What are your opinions, and how do you know if someone has dyslexia?
So some of the emotional and social interactions and effects that it can have on students are a higher level of stress and anxiety. So if it goes without proper intervention or support, it can lead to students having really high levels of stress and anxiety, which, because students are at a greater risk of blaming themselves for their difficulties, and this can lead to a lot of self-doubt, incrimination, and it can erode at people's self-esteem and make their work, school, and social interactions much harder. Also, the pressure and stress of trying to keep up with their peers is extremely hard on students and can lead students to sometimes just giving up or not even trying anymore after not having the support they need. Another one is their self-image. This can have a pretty detrimental effect on a student's self-image, with many expressing feelings of being dumb or less capable than their peers. Also, it can increase their feelings of failure, that they may be discouraged to not continue doing school. Also, the thoughts and opinions of their peers and people around them can have a huge effect on the student's self-image. So students with dyslexia are at higher risk of being bullied and can cause a lot of social strain in their lives. That also has effects on their mood. So many students with dyslexia often display symptoms of depression. So it's caused by the higher levels of stress related to school, also low self-esteem, and the negative thoughts about their capabilities and doubts about their future because of their disability. So some of the ways you can start to help as a teacher. So students are more successful when they have an active support and encouragement, and teachers can create that by first making any accommodations that are applicable to your classroom dictated by the IEP, if the student has one. And if not, and they need to become tested, taking those appropriate steps. Also, by listening to the child's feelings. Anxiety, anger, and depression are common emotions. Because of this language barrier, it can sometimes be hard for students to express these emotions. So adults need to encourage them to talk about these feelings. Also, rewarding effort and progress, not just an end product, and helping the students create achievable and realistic goals to help them improve their morale and self-image in school. So application to teaching. Challenges that you might run into as a teacher is students may have dyslexia and not realize it because it's their normal. And they also might choose not to report it for a variety of reasons. For younger students, it might be because they're embarrassed. For some, it might be they don't think they need extra help. And something that I found interesting is older students choose not to report it because they fear it may lower their chances of admission to like institutions. And so how can we overcome and help students? As with any disability, education and understanding is key. So something that I found when I was reading, it is highly likely that teachers' abilities in dealing with different forms of difficulties will be affected by their knowledge about and attitudes towards those difficulties. So that particular reading was about teachers and their attitudes towards students with dyslexia, which I didn't think would be an issue, but apparently it is. So it's important to remember to just be patient and have a good attitude, and to remember that frustration is normal both with you and with your students. So carefully observe students and get them the appropriate resources. Students with dyslexia all have separate complex needs, as we've mentioned before. So research and utilize technology. So computers and laptops have been used. You can get your students' lecture notes ahead of time. And there's also text-to-speech software that can help them keep up. I also found that there were scanners and other text-to-speech tools that are being researched currently. It's important to give your students a good support structure and look into creating an appropriate IEP, which is an individualized education program. How can parents and teachers help? So when I was looking around, I found some fun, like this is probably more applicable to younger students, but you can, as a parent or as a teacher, you could play some fun games with them to help them with phonological awareness. So you could work on some alliteration and tongue twisters. You could play a game called Odd Man Out, which is like where you have a list of words and one doesn't belong for whatever reason. Maybe it doesn't end with the same sound or it's not the same subject. You can work on comprehension. So you can read a story and then ask them to describe the plot or ask them to describe their favorite character. And understanding syllables. So just singing rhymes or nursery rhymes can also be helpful for younger students. Some quick things to watch for, we kind of discussed a little bit, but students will have trouble with comprehension, they'll have trouble with figures of speech, with alliterations, and with language that is used in math. So not math problems themselves, but like language used in math problems. So if you spot any of these consistently, maybe look into getting a more concrete test to determine if they do have dyslexia or maybe they have something else going on. And the most important thing to remember as a teacher is to stay patient. Try not to worry or be too nervous because it will rub off on your students. And that's our citation.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there questions, comments for this group?
I was kind of curious, did you guys find like research that talked about like using like multimodal ways of like giving out content? So like not just like I'm thinking for like English courses, like a lot of what you do is, you know, read and then talk about what you read, or you have to write. But I was wondering if you guys found research that was like, maybe they don't always have to read like a novel. It can be like, or it can be expressed in different ways, like with pictures or.
Yeah. So I didn't read anything about it, but so my brother, he has dyslexia, and kind of when we were doing this project, I kind of asked him like, you know, like what exactly did teachers do with you during school? Because, you know, he struggles with reading a lot. And, you know, he kind of throughout time learned different ways and kind of different techniques. And he said a lot of that was during his English classes, he would go into para and they would have him sometimes get on a computer and just read little sentences and then kind of incorporate that with other readings. And yeah, like you said, like there's picture books out there that have reading with it where you can kind of apply the readings to pictures, so it can kind of speed up the process a little bit. Because like it's, you know, it's not that they can't read, it's that, you know, they're a little slower. And so if you can kind of figure out a way to speed up the process, then I think whatever kind of student, every student is different, and I think whatever way that you can possibly find to do that, I think would be pretty beneficial.
Also, along that note, some of the techniques that I've seen in my family and that I've read about and that my brother uses is he listens to a lot of audiobooks. So like, you know, in school they had us do book reports and things like that. He would listen to a book and then sometimes follow along in the book, and that helped him a lot with recognizing and understanding the words. And he's used it in some of his classes too, having it being read aloud with him following along has really helped him. He also uses a lot of the text to speech when he's writing papers, and that really helps him write and get his thoughts down without having to have that writing component that really kind of slows down the process and helps him get his thoughts down better. And some of the techniques that my mom used to have is sometimes she would turn the book upside down and that would help her. So I think each individual has own ways of coping with dyslexia and helping themselves improve. So it's just a matter of patience and trying new things until something works.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions for this group? So I just had a couple things, and I want to say thanks to Maddie for bringing up the idea of using like audio books and whatnot. And actually, I'll even say that that's even something that potentially can be helpful for even those that do not have dyslexia. I know for me, just because I get really tired when I read, my eyes do not like to focus on words. So I do like to have a physical copy of the book and it downloaded on my Audible, and I like to listen to it and follow along. And it's so much easier even to make notes and to make it stick. So maybe even having that opportunity to kind of incorporate that into all students' learnings could potentially help those with dyslexia not feel singled out, that they've got to do this different step and do things differently. So it might just kind of help with some of that stigma that they have as well. And I was kind of surprised at how similar, even though the experiences are different, but still a little bit similar with what ELLs experience when they're in a classroom and they're not understanding, you know, trying to make sense of those words. It does take a lot longer, and that was definitely very fascinating as well. So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments before we get ready to sign off for today? I do want to thank the two groups that went today, the groups that went on Tuesday. These presentations are really wonderful. You guys have put in a lot of hard work on these so far. I am really curious to see how others turn out. I know that there are some overlaps, that groups did some of the same topics, and that's okay. Some of the material might be similar, some of it probably won't. And that's all okay. It's nice to see all these different products and all the resources that are coming forward from the work that you've all done. I did want to just check base with everyone and see, you know, if everyone's doing okay with the idea that campus is going online a week earlier than what was intended, and just make sure everybody's doing okay there, and if there's anything that anybody needs. All right. Well, we will pick up with our presentations on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, stay safe, and we will see you then.